Okay, good evening, everyone. I wanted to welcome everyone here to our latest installment on the study of First Samuel, and tonight we're going to be going over chapters 5 and 6. And here again is our, me and my maps. We got our little map here. It tells you the area that basically we're talking about here. A little bit further south here, this map didn't extend, but I've got another map just so that you don't get lost, and to show you where we're talking about tonight. And this lesson tonight, we're going to be going over chapters 5 and 6. And these are the major events of that, and we'll be talking about each one of them. Where the ark was captured, that was in chapter 4, and then so in chapter 5, they've relocated. The Philistines have taken it from the battlefield up at Ebenezer, and they brought it down to Ashdod, and then at the temple of Dagon, where they put the ark as a war trophy. They put it in there during the night. Their statue of Dagon had fallen over, and it was face down right in front of the ark. And so then tumors break out in Ashdod, and then the ark was moved to Gath and then to Ekron. Both places they had tumors and all sorts of troubles. And so finally the ark was moved up to Beth Shemesh or Beit Shemesh, and back into Israel territory. So Israel now has custody of it again. And the people at Beth Shemesh, they didn't give the ark the proper respect and handling, and so some people lost their lives over that one too. So let's go ahead. Are there any questions at all about where we are, what we're doing right now in the class? Any questions or comments? Okay, well then let's go ahead and we'll read the scriptures that are involved with this. 1 Samuel 5, 1 through 5. Now the Philistines had taken the ark of God, and they brought it up from Ebenezer to Ashdod. The Philistines took the ark of God and brought it to the temple of Dagon and placed it beside Dagon. But when the Ashdodites rose early the next morning, to everyone's surprise, Dagon had fallen to his face on the ground before the ark of Adonai. So they took Dagon up and put him back into his place. But when they arose early the next morning, surprisingly, Dagon had fallen to his face on the ground before the ark of Adonai, and the head of Dagon and both palms of his hands were cut off on the threshold. Only Dagon's trunk was left on him. That is why to this day neither the priest of Dagon nor any who enter Dagon's house will tread on Dagon's threshold in Ashdod. All right, so here is a picture of Dagon, the Philistine god. Now, this you'll note that it's a man, fish, merman, something or another, and you may remember that there was also the god Dagon that was up in the other parts of Canaan. So what they suspect here is that the Philistines, they're the sea people. They came in some 300 or 400 or 500 years before this. They'd gotten here. They had basically just accepted or adopted this Canaanite god as their own, and but then they have their own little twist to it because he's a fish there. But and then it's also interesting that the word for fish in Hebrew, anybody know what that is right offhand? The word for fish in Hebrew.
Dog.
Dog, D-A-G. There you go. And so that again, this stuff all kind of runs together in the deities, and so that's what it was. That's what it looked like. It was on the pedestal, and it fell over. And then the next night, they saw it, and here it had fallen over again. But this time, the statue had lost his head and hands. So what that meant was that not only it was one of those kind of things where the statue was not only laying down prostrate in front of the Ark of the Covenant, and which would, basically that's how when you have an emperor or a king or some kind of a potentate there, that when people would approach him, they would approach him, down with their face to the ground, a kowtow, as it were, in Oriental parlance. But in another way, in the Middle East and so forth, you would come down in a bow. So that was looking at what, that's how this god, this the statue of this little g god Dagon appeared to the people in Ashdod. Now the picture here, it kind of gives you the idea of how the thing was laying, but um, in relation, the relationship of the size and so forth is a little bit wonky, because we know that the uh, Ark of the Covenant was only like, it was a little bit under 2 feet by 4 feet by 2 feet high. So the showing this, that would somehow show this statue of Dagon was much larger than what it really was. So, but this idea of the head being gone and the hands being gone basically renders this god totally defeated and useless, because he had no head and he had no hands to carry out warfare or anything like that. If you hearken back to Egypt and all of the plagues that went up against Egypt, um, they were plagues against the Egyptian gods. Each one of the plagues was targeting a specific Egyptian god. So, and that's what Adonai seems to be doing here with this statue falling like that. Okay, so going ahead in verse 6, then the hand of Adonai was heavy upon the Ashdodites, ravaging them and afflicting Ashdod and its vicinity with tumors. When the men of Ashdod saw what was happening, they said, "The ark of the God of Israel must not stay with us, for his hand has dealt harshly against us, as well as against our god Dagon." So they sent word and gathered all the lords of the Philistines to them, and asked, "What will we do with the ark of the God of Israel?" And they replied, "Let the ark of God be carried over to Gath." So they carried the ark of the God of Israel over. But it came about that after they had carried it around, that the hand of Adonai was against the city, causing very great panic, as he struck the people of the city, from the youngest to the oldest, with tumors broke out on them. All right, so what we have here is, this is the map that that we had, that shows, right up here, right outside the map, is where the battle was there at Ebenezer, and when the ark was captured by the Philistines. So they brought it down to Ashdod, which was one of their major cities. They had 5 major cities, and so they said that in this city, they brought it down here and they set it up in the temple of Dagon, and then they said, in the, we already talked about how the thing fell over and so forth. the statue of Dagon fell over. But then they said that in the city, the walled city, the fortified city here, plus all of around the environs, the little countless villages, the unfortified villages that were all around there, they say they all of them became inflicted or struck down by the same malady. And so what was it? They said that they had tumors broke out on them. All right, now so I took some pictures of people that have bubonic plague. And so that's what one of the, many of the commentators say that's what this was, okay, that it was a type of bubonic plague. And because it also talks about mice being overrunning them and so forth. So what these are, if those of you who are in the medical business will understand that these are actually in lymph nodes. The bubonic plague causes the lymph nodes to swell up, and then they will eventually, many of them will burst. It's pretty nasty. And so I spared you some of the most gruesome pictures that my wife and my daughter says, yeah, meh, but for people like me, I look at them and I'm just grossed out. And so I spared you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So, and it said that he struck them from the youngest to the oldest, everybody. Now, there are some commentators, quite a large body of commentators that that say that these words that they got for tumors was actually they go through some some machinations to say that no, what they were talking about was really hemorrhoids on steroids. Just industrial strength hemorrhoids is what God was afflicting them with. But it also talks about those, that the people died from this whatever it was that caused the tumors. Generally speaking, you don't die from hemorrhoids. You just wish you could. So um, I think it was probably more like the plague. Okay, and I thought my wife was going to say something, but she didn't. Okay. So anyway, that's what I think it was. It was a tumor based on the bubonic plague. All right. Any comments or questions so far? Any folks in the medical business want to comment further on that? Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and look at verse 10. Verse 10. So they sent the ark of God to Ekron, but it came about as the ark of God came to Ekron, that the Ekronites cried out, saying, they brought around the ark of the God of Israel to us to kill us and our people. So they sent word and gathered all the lords of the Philistines and said, send the ark of the God of Israel away. Let it go back to its own place so it won't kill us and our people. For a panic of death was throughout the entire city, as God's hand was very heavy there. The people who did not die were afflicted with tumors, so that the outcry of the city went up to heaven. All right, so here's a case of these guys really getting this nasty whatever it was. And then it also goes on to talk about vermin, mice or rats overrunning everything. Well, as we know, bubonic plague is caused by fleas that are on the rats, and then just if you have poor hygiene within your community and you don't clean up often, then these things get out of hand, and the fleas will get on people, and then it infects them with the bubonic plague. And just as an aside, uh, in Europe, when the plague was running rampant in the Middle Ages, in the Dark Ages, whenever it was, in 12, 1300s, um, the one of the symptoms of bubonic plague was, somebody would be going along there, and then all of a sudden they would sneeze, and people would look at them, um, and say, "Well, I wonder if this is it." So they started uh, to do a kind of a blessing, and they would say, "God bless you," every time when someone would sneeze, because they thought that was a precursor to the plague, the Black Death, as they called it. And so that was, and many times it was. That was the beginning of it. That's like when you're starting to get a cold or flu or something like that. You feel a little achy, and then your throat a little bit sore. And so they had precursors of real bad symptoms. All right. And so you wonder then, um, okay, so why did they um, why did they do this? Why didn't they um, just right then bring the ark back to Israel and so forth? Because it was there 7 months. But one of the things is that the capture and display. That was a war trophy, and it was not uncommon for when you took over a country, you went to battle with them, and you defeated them. Then you would take the symbol of their deity, whatever that was, what kind of an idol it was or whatever, and they would bring it then back to wherever their capital city was, put it up there, kind of, it's a war trophy is what it was. It became a war trophy. And so the the ark there was a war trophy for Israel, for Philistines against Israel. And uh, so this was a symbol of victory over an enemy, but at the same time, it was a symbol of the victor's God, deity, over the defeated entity's deity. Okay, so that means my God's bigger than your God, that sort of thing. And that's where the Philistines were looking at this. That they had captured the ark, they had beaten the Israelites, so therefore their God Dagon was bigger than the real God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Little did they know, and of course we're seeing now that it's not ending well for them. So giving up the ark would have been admitting that Dagon was inferior to Adonai, the God of Israel. So they did not want to lose face, and they didn't want to have the idea out there in the world that their God was not as good as the Israelites' God. And so that's why they said, well, we'll try it down here. We'll go to this other city and put it in there. Maybe it'll be okay then. But what happened was that each time that they would move the ark to that city, well, this plague would break out again. And it coincided exactly with when the ark would be brought into that particular city. They bring the ark in, somebody would sneeze, they'd say, "God bless you," and next thing you know, everybody's infected with this black death, bubonic plague. And also along with that came a bunch of vermin and rats and mice and stuff. And they said it went through their fields and their storehouses and so forth. So they were in bad shape here. So sending it to these other towns was a way to, okay, well, maybe we can keep the ark, we can keep this symbol of our victory over the Israelites if we'll send it to these other towns. Maybe it'll work. And the problem with that is that it didn't work. And what we see is that um, that basically, without firing a shot, God has used the ark all the way down through the Philistine landscape there, and He's devastating these people with the ark. Israel had nothing to do with it, and it was God's hand, and the Philistines recognized it. They actually did recognize that it was the God of Israel that is inflicting them this so much pain and suffering on them. So um, that's I thought that was kind of an interesting way, that another way that God comes on and um, accomplishes His purposes without the help of man. It just a lot of times when Israel would go to battle, the Lord would go in there and sow confusion with the enemy, and they'd kill themselves rather than Israel lifting a hand. And here's another case where, yeah, they really defeated the or that God defeated the Philistines here over a 7-month period, and Israel didn't lose one single soldier to anything after they lost the ark. God did it all. Okay, so any questions, comments, or on that right there? Okay. Oops. Here we go. Okay. So, um, and I apologize for that being so heavily pixelated, but even pixelated, you can tell what it is. There's a little mice, okay, little mices. Um, Reading in 1 Samuel 6:1-4. After the ark of Adonai had been in the country of the Philistines 7 months, the Philistines summoned the priests and the diviners, saying, "What should we do with the ark of Adonai? Tell us how we should send it back to its place." So they said, "If you're going to send the ark of God of Israel back, do not send it empty, for you must surely return it with a guilt offering. Then you will be healed, and it will be revealed to you why His hand has not been removed from you. What guilt offering should we return to Him?" And they said to him, 5 golden tumors and 5 golden mice, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines. One for plague was on each of you, or for one plague was on each of you and on your lords. All right. Now, again, there's a lot of controversy among the PhD deities out there that study this stuff all the time. That okay, so what does it mean here that what gift should we give them? And here it's translated in the Tree of Life version. It's translated 5 golden tumors, or big lumps of gold, 5 big mounds, basically mounds or hilltops. That the word that they use for tumors was also hills, or it could be hills, or it could be a big lump, and so forth. So it's a big old lump of gold and 5 golden mice. And then some commentators said, no, what it meant was that 5 big lumps of gold, namely these 5 rats or mice made out of gold. Um, Either way, and both sides argue over as if it was a salvation issue, which it isn't. So, but they get really wound up in some of their discussions over this. It's kind of fun to watch sometimes when these professors do that sort of stuff. So, it was kind of entertaining to this week to look at that. But these guys here, these little mice, that was, they said that they brought back, or they sent out 5 big chunks, whether this was a big chunk of gold plus the mice, or if it was just like it was a big chunk of mouse, big chunk of mouse there, um, that kind of looked like a tumor because it was kind of humped over like that. So we don't know, and frankly, to me, it's not important. Um, but they'd kept this thing for 7 months. Interesting, a lot of times, the 7 being the number of completion. So God had accomplished His purpose here, and it's after 7 months of being afflicted with all of these diseases, this disease, the plague, and pain and suffering and everything. Then they finally said, let's go find our priests and diviners and find out what we should do. But um, and it's like they say, what should we do with the ark? Tell us how we should send it back. So basically, they've already made up their mind that they're going to send it back to Israel. And so it's just a question of, okay, if we're going to send it back to Israel, what do we do with it now? How do we do this? And so the priests and their priests and their fortune tellers and so forth, they said, well, look, if you're going to send it back, do not send it back empty. You better heap on some gold or something like that and give them something in addition to just getting their ark back. I'm sure Israel would have been happy just with the ark, but putting the gold on there is just that's a lanyap. It's something a bit extra, and so that's what they did. But they were not foolish enough. The Philistines were not foolish enough then to say, well, we got this box. Somebody lift the lid on that thing. We'll put these things inside. No. They didn't do that. They actually put it in a separate box and then put it on the ox cart to send it away separately from, in the same cart, but separately from the ark itself. And so it's interesting here that they use the word, what guilt offering should we use? Should we return to Him? So they had an idea of the Israelite sacrificial system, and they're telling people, okay, we've really messed up on this thing, and so how do we appease Israel? And more importantly, how do we appease Israel's God? Do we send out this? Do we have a fellowship offering? Well, that didn't seem very appropriate. So they're going with the guilt offering, and and that's when the priests and the fortune tellers tell them, okay, the 5 golden tumors and the 5 golden mice, or the 5 golden tumors, namely big old fat rats. We don't know. And just listening to, like I said, I've been studying this week, and reading some of the arguments on there, it'll give you a headache. It really will. And to me, it's just a distinction without a difference. All right. Any comments or questions? All righty then. Going on to chapter 6, verse 5. So you will make images of your tumors and images of your mice that mar the land, and you must give glory to God of Israel. Perhaps He will lighten His hand off of you, your gods, and your land. Why harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts? When He afflicted them, didn't they send them away, so they left? Now, therefore, get a new cart ready, 2 milk cows on which there has never been a yoke. Hitch the cows to the cart, return their calves home away from them, and then take the ark of Adonai and place it on the cart Also put golden objects that you return to him as a gift offering in a box by its side. Then send it off so it may go. Then watch. If it goes up by the way of its own territory to Beth Shemesh, then it was he who inflicted on us this great harm. But if not, then we will know that it was not his hand that struck us. It just happened to us by chance. It's just one of those things. All right. So what did they do? They said, okay, we're going to put this thing in a cart, and you see that, and we're going to get a couple of cows, milk cows. I don't even know what kind of milk cows they would have had back in those days. But they said, we want some milk cows. And then they had, there were some stipulations, a milk cow that has never pulled a plow. Okay. Well, generally speaking, milk cows don't pull plows or pull a load, a wagon or ox cart or anything like that. Because why? Because they are milk cows. That's what they're bred to do. That's what they should be doing. And so they said, let's do that and get these cows that have never been broken to the harness. They've never had a harness on them before. Well, that is generally not a good idea to just throw a harness on the cow and the wagon on it and say, giddy up. And as they, and there they go, and nothing happens. Well, we don't know how that worked out with these guys, but they said just bring them up there. And not only that, they did some other really weird, strange stuff. Both of these milk cows had calves. Now we don't know exactly, the age of the calves, but they were still nursing, still suckling. And so they took the calves and they brought them back to their own home. And their thought was that, look, if we'll put the cows and the cart right out there in the road, if it goes up toward Beit Shemesh, then we know it was their God that caused all this stuff. And if it heads south down to, say, Beersheba or wherever, then we'll know that, okay, maybe it wasn't God of Israel that did that, but something else. And we just don't know. We don't understand it yet at this point. All right. So I don't know if any of you have ever been around animals that are, let's just say, not broken for service yet, and you try to push it. Or if you were to take an animal that you'd never been broken to the plow or riding or whatever, and you try to jump on them right away, there again, you're going to eat some dirt, especially if it's a horse or something like that, and you try to jump on him. Yeah, you're going to eat some dirt. So I think with the cows, it could be the same way, because if they're not used to it, one of them's going to pull, the other one's going to push back, then he'll push forward. The other one says, no, I don't want to do that way. And then there they go. They're on separate ways, and it would be just a disaster. So the idea here was, well, I need to go ahead with the other verse there to figure that out. Verse 10. So the people did so. They took 2 milk cows and hitched them to the cart and shut up their calves at home. And then they placed the Ark of Adonai on the cart together with the box, the golden mice, and the models of their tumors, so that the cows took the way straight toward Beth Shemesh. They kept along the same highway, lowing as they went. Okay, and as lowing as they went, and turned aside neither to the right nor to the left. The lords of the Philistines followed them to the border of Beth Shemesh, Beit Shemesh. All right, so they took the calves and they put them, back in the barn or something like that, and then put these two old cows up there in the street with this cart and just abandoned them. Didn't tell them which way to go. Didn't do anything. Didn't have a guy sitting there uh, with a little whip and singing rawhide, wow, and doing all that kind of stuff. No, they didn't do any of that. They just put the cows on there, which had never been yoked. So the very idea that they're not jumping around and acting foolish and stupid is pretty miraculous. And then they didn't have a driver, a drover. They didn't have a drover to steer the cows in the right direction. They just set them out there and said, "Okay, giddy up, go." And so that's when they went. Their thought process was that if we do this and the cows go up to Beit Shemesh, then we know it's their God. Okay, then we don't want to deal with that. We don't want to fight that. But if it goes another direction, then okay, maybe we'll keep the ark and figure out why we're getting some of these things that we're getting. So that's how that worked out. Now they put these up, and sure enough, they put the ark and everything in there, and the cows, did a turn there and headed on the road straight toward straight toward Beth Shemesh, and went this whole route there without someone to steer them, and do G and hawing and stuff like that, and making sure they stayed on the road. So no, they went all the way up to Beth Shemesh, and in fact, let's go ahead and read the other verses there. And 13. Now the people of Beth Shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley. When they lifted up their eyes and saw the ark, they rejoiced to see it. The ark came to the field of Joshua by Beth Shemesh and stopped there. There was a large stone. Then they chopped the wood of the cart, offered up the cows as a burnt offering to Adonai. The Levites took down the ark of Adonai and the box that was with it that contained the holy objects, and placed them on the large stone. Then the people of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and sacrifices to Adonai that day. All right, so when they show up here, when they show up there, it says that they're harvesting wheat. Now, harvesting wheat is going to be a very late April, early May. From there, that's the most optimistic date that would be somewhere. Okay, but it would go from a little bit late in April all the way through May until the beginning of June, something like that. That was their wheat harvest. So when does Shavuot, or the feast there, when does that Shavuot, when does that take place? Well, it takes place at that same time frame, 50 days after Pesach, whenever Pesach was that year. And there, during the feast of the wheat harvest, we've been in Israel during one of their major harvests. It was the wheat harvest, and so it was kind of neat to see these, all these fields out there with the big combines going through and harvesting the wheat. Sure enough, you look at your watch, your clock, and your calendar, and says, "Yeah, this is coming up on Shavuot." So anyway, the ark returns to Israel on Shavuot. Anybody know what else happened at Shavuot that may call us to remember the Lord? Anybody got an idea what may have happened at Shavuot?
Giving of the word.
Say again.
Giving of the law.
Giving of the law, absolutely. So at that time, God gave Israel the law. He gave them also the instructions for the Ark of the Covenant, And so now he's bringing the Ark of the Covenant back to Israel on or about Shavuot. So again, just proving the case in point that Yeshua, that the Lord Adonai Hashem is a God of anniversaries, and dates are important to him. So that's why when you come to some of these feasts, you just be aware of the history behind them and what may transpire eschatologically speaking, or in the end times, what may be happening. For instance, when you have well, say for instance Rosh Hashanah. That's a lot of people equate that, the blowing of the trumpet there at the Rosh Hashanah, with the blowing of the seventh trumpet sound in Revelation, in the book of Revelation, when all of the vials of wrath and so forth were poured out. So they look at that blowing of the trumpet on Rosh Hashanah, which was mandated by God, and also they said, well, that would be a good time then, because when the Bible says that when the last trumpet sounds, then you look up, because here comes the Messiah. He is on his way. And so there again, these anniversaries, is it going to happen like that? I don't know, but God says you're not going to know the time or the day or the time, but you can know the season that it may be coming in. Okay, and just be aware of, okay, this could be it. And the way I take a rabbit trail here, that for instance, I believe that the end time, the so-called rapture that they've been teaching for the last 150 years, being caught away, that sort of thing, will not happen before we go through the tribulation period, because there's just a lot of reasons. But for one reason, and it's not going to be tomorrow. The rapture is not going to take place tomorrow or the next day or the next day, because why? They need a temple in Jerusalem again. You have to have a temple in Jerusalem for the Yeshua to come back, because they'll have their temple. They'll reinstitute the sacrifice system. It won't mean anything because we already have the perfect sacrifice in Yeshua. But then at that point, Israel will make a peace treaty with the world, and there will be peace with Israel for 3.5 years. Whoever in the world that they made the treaty with will break the treaty, and they will desecrate the temple. So that's called the abomination of desolation. And then at that point, from that point until the next 3.5 years takes place, you better start looking, because Yeshua could very well come back on those days. All right. What else do we know about Beit Shemesh? It was a Levitical town. It was one of the Levitical cities, and therefore what does that mean? That means they had some Levites and priests living there in the town, so they knew what to do with the ark. But what happened? Maybe before the priest got there, or maybe it was the priest that initiated it, or whatever. Somebody thought, hey, let's look inside and see if those Philistines stole anything, or what does that? I wonder what that manna looks like now, 400 years later. And so, for whatever reason they did, they went down in there and pulled the lid, or tried to pull the lid off of the Ark of the Covenant to look inside. And what happens? They were struck dead. All right. So let's go ahead. I think we're in verse 16. Now, when the 5 lords of the Philistines had seen it, they'd been following along the ark, they returned to Ekron that same day. So these are the golden tumors that the Philistines returned as a guilt offering to Adonai, one for Ashdod, one for Gaza, one for Ashkelon, one for Gath, and one for Ekron. Now these are those are the Pentapolis. Those are the five major cities of the Philistines. The golden mice also corresponded to the number of all the cities of the Philistines belonging to the five lords, both the fortified cities and their country villages, as far as the large stone on which they had set down the mark of Adonai. It remains to this day in the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh. All right. Any comments or questions on that before we expound on that a little bit more? All right. So they brought this thing in, and everybody is just really, really happy. And it was around Shavuot, and they're having their harvest. So it would have been a joyous time. Well, just to add joy to joy, they look up, and here's two cows pulling a cart with the Ark of Covenant, and not a Philistine in sight. And so that would have been, what a surprise that would have been. And going on in verse 19 says, then he struck down some of the men of Beth Shemesh because they'd gazed into the ark of Adonai. He struck down the people, 70 out of 50,000 men. The people mourned because Adonai also had struck the people a great slaughter. So the men of Beth Shemesh asked, who is able to stand before Adonai, this holy God? To whom should it go from us? So then they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kiriath Jearim, saying, the Philippines have brought us the ark of Adonai. Come down, bring it up to you. Okay. Said that there were these guys they were curious or whatever. Who knows why they did what they did, but they pulled the cover off of the ark to look inside, and God struck them. They died. I'm just right. Can you think of what's the guy, Indiana Jones, and the what was I can't remember the name of the Lost Temple, not the Lost Temple, the Raiders of the Lost Ark or something like that. Where the Nazis lift the cover off of it, and there's a whirlwind of God's Spirit come through, and it hits a person, and all of a sudden their flesh melts off of them, their eyeballs are gone, and it looks really like a crypt keeper. And so we don't know how these guys died, whether they just pull the thing off, looked in there, and you go, oops, and then just pass out dead. We don't know how that happened. It's not told to us. But the ark, then they said, well, look, this is not good. We got these people they have died, 70 people. If you had a little village and 70 men passed away, then you've got to know, okay, we're not doing something so hot here. And so they said, what else do we do with this thing? Where can we send it? So they came up with the idea of sending it up to Kiriath Jearim, which was already a religious site, as it were, much more so than this village where they're at, or than Beth Shemesh and so forth. So they had gone up they were bringing up then to Kiriath Jearim. It was a high place, which meant that it was a site of worship of a false god. And but they got up there. There was a Levitical priest living there, and so they took it up to him. He took the thing into his home, and eventually, set up a place for it, and kept it safe and all that kind of stuff. And his name was Abinadab, And so the ark went up there, and it stayed in the home of Abinadab for 20 years. And so, I'm sure God blessed Abinadab big time, but that was the end of the journey of the ark. Now, why didn't they take it back up to Shiloh? Any ideas why they didn't take it back up to Shiloh? Anybody? Okay, come on. I'm gonna unmute everybody, so you just shout it out if you know why you think that you know, they didn't take it back to Shiloh, huh? Oh, Pat says everybody was afraid of it. Any other comment? Okay, so what about this? What about if the ark was not taken back up to Shiloh because the Philistines had already sacked Shiloh, and there is archaeological evidence that suggests that after the ark was taken, the Philistines in that same battle, they just pursued back up this upstream to Shiloh, and at that point they burned it down and destroyed it. And if the ark was gone, then the priests had no more jobs, so they just wandered off, and so there was nothing left at Shiloh. If you look at the pictures of it, it's not all that terribly habitable. So that was probably one of the reasons that they didn't bring it back to Shiloh, and they just left it at Kiriath Yearim, and it stayed there in the home of Abinadab for the next 20 years. So anyway, next week we're going to be talking. We're going to start into the actual judgeship of Samuel, and getting into the meat of the book of First Samuel. So I think all of this other stuff that we've been in is just kind of a precursor to it. And next week we'll get into it big time. All right. Any comments?